partnership with Cambridge University Students' Union, and we have a couple of their full-time officers here and their media team, I believe, so welcome them as well. So we will begin with the opening speeches, and we're going to begin with Daniel Zyper from the Labour Party.
Well, thank you very much, Lee, and thank you everybody for coming tonight. In my introductory comments, I want to first of all just thank the officers and staff members of Student Union here for working so closely with me over the 2 very short years I've had in Parliament so far. It's been a joy working with you. It's been a shame that we've been having to campaign against cuts to disabled students' allowance. It's been a shame that we are having to fight for maintenance grants. But it's been good we've also been able to do things locally like the Good Night Out campaign. It's been a delight to see some of you down in Parliament. 3 quick things, introductory points I would make. First of all, for me, the most depressing time probably in my political life was June the 23rd last year. I was shattered, like so many people I think, by the decision that our country took to leave the European Union. And I think it does have a particular effect on an institution like this. I'm told that some 12% of the staff here are EU nationals. And I know just how worried people are about their futures. So I can tell you that if Labour wins the election, we will act immediately to secure the future of EU nationals. And I think it's a big, big difference from the Conservative position, and I think really important. I think it's morally right, but I think it's also vital for institutions like this. Secondly, probably one of the events I remember most in my 2 years was meeting student nurses here at ARU, fighting to stop the nonsense of reducing or eliminating their bursaries. Hundreds of student nurses I met here. It's a fantastic campaign. Joined with people from across the country, but obviously, again, particularly important for this institution. And what a nonsense it's turned out to be. I'm told that the number of people applying has fallen by 22 to 25% here, which is similar across the country. So just when we need more people coming into nursing, what's the government done? It's actually shafted the system that provided that supply of our nurses. Major mistake, which Labour will reverse. And then finally, of course, the big offer that Labour has made to students at this election. Now, I know there is some cynicism around promises to abolish tuition fees, and I understand why that is. But I think Jeremy Corbyn will do it, and I think we've shown exactly where the money is going to come from. It's going to come from that concentration of wealth at the very top of our society. It's only taking business taxes back to where they were 5 years ago under David Cameron. I don't remember that being described as some kind of extreme system. Basically, the money is there, but we want to use it to actually support our young people, but not just universities, to make sure it actually helps people in the further education system too. So restoring educational maintenance allowance, making sure we've got a proper educational system from cradle to grave, and also funding our school system properly. So I think it's a big offer from Labour, a big choice. Also help us, people who have already got loans. We can perhaps talk about that more further. But I think this is a fantastic time to have the opportunity to vote for the change we all need.
Thank you very much. And the next speech will be from Julian Hubbard from the Lib Dems.
Well, thank you, Lee, and it's great to be back here and to see so many friends. I've worked for many years with Arusu and with QSU. I've taught in both universities. I apologise to anyone who's in any of my classes. But it is great to be back here for this election campaign. And I also want to start off by talking about Brexit, because I think it is the big issue. It's a thing that historians will look back on and write about for what decision was made now, and it defines all of your futures. I went round campaigning, talking about the effects Brexit would have on prosperity, on opportunity, peace, the environment and security. And this is your future that is at stake. The opportunities you'll have to study and work abroad, for students and staff from the EU to come here. And I agree we should protect EU citizens. They are our friends, our neighbours, our colleagues. Sadly, we've seen both the Conservatives and Labour abandon that, heading for a hard Brexit. The Labour manifesto is very clear, and we know how bad the Tories have been on this. That is the big issue. And if you don't like Brexit, you should vote for an anti-Brexit party. But I also want to talk about student issues, which again I've campaigned on for many, many years, with Arusu, with QSU, with NUS. And in fact, 2 years ago, the NUS, National Union of Students, not famous for being a pro-Lib Dem organisation by any stretch of the imagination, described me in a public piece they put out as a great friend to the student movement. For my work leading the campaign against cuts to disabled student allowance, we actually won that one. For championing postgraduate education, again we managed to get changes to make it better. And in particular, for fighting tuition fees, something I've been committed to since I was a student when Labour introduced tuition fees after they promised not to. I would love to get rid of tuition fees, to why I proposed an amendment in Parliament to get rid of them, and got the support from not a single Labour MP. I would love to see them go. If there's a properly costed vote to get rid of them, I would be so pleased to get that done. There are other big issues that we could talk about. I agree about student nurse bursaries. The one I want to pick up is one which affects many people in this room, but never gets talked about, which is mental health. And I know Arusu have done some big work on mental health around Anglia Ruskin. I know QSU has done a lot of that. In both places, there's roughly an 8-week wait for support from a counsellor. That is not acceptable. That means people are not getting support that they desperately need. I've campaigned for many years to try to get mental health services better. It means destigmatisation, it means providing more support when people have problems, it involves more prevention. It's something that we will put money into. 1p on income tax gives us £6 billion to the NHS and social care, with £1 billion of that earmarked to make a huge difference to mental health. That's something worth fighting for. The other issue I know for many of you concerns you is about housing and the private rented sector. Again, I had a bill in Parliament to try to make conditions better. More secure tenancies, protection from rogue landlords, an end to those extortionate letting agent fees. I want to keep that going. I only won part of that fight. So if you want an MP who has made a difference for students and for Cambridge, made it a better place to be, I hope you'll think about voting for me.
Thank you very much, Julian. And the next for an opening speech is Stuart Tuckwood from the Green Party.
Okay, thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. I'm Stuart Tuckwood. I'm the Green Party candidate for Cambridge City at this election. Like many of you here tonight, I'm a young person. I'm 27 years old. I'm a nurse. I work at Addenbrooke's Hospital. So I've got good experience of all the issues and the challenges that are facing young people at the moment. And let's have a little think about, just for a minute, about those big issues that need to be decided upon at this election. Because this election, make no mistake, is huge and there are big issues at stake. Brexit is undoubtedly a big one, but let's think about the economy first of all. We're facing an economy at the moment where wages have dropped over the last 10 years, where there's a real rise in insecure work, 0 hours contracts, and a dramatic rise in in-work poverty, people who are working but who can't even pay the bills. And we're being told that our public services, our NHS that I work for, social care, schools, we don't have enough money to fund those things properly. And there'll be big decisions to make about those issues in the coming 5 years. And undoubtedly, Brexit is a huge issue. We need to make decisions about what kind of country we actually want to be, whether we want to be an open, welcoming country that celebrates the contribution that migrants make and that welcomes people coming here, or whether we close off and give up on our agreements with the rest of the world, the rest of Europe around climate change and tax avoidance. And something that no one else is mentioning at any of these hustings, but which is becoming more important than ever, is the issue of climate change. We've seen today Donald Trump, the US president, wanting to withdraw from the deal, the Paris Climate Change Accord, a deal which has the potential to save our futures. And it's more important now than ever before that the UK steps forward and takes a leadership role in dealing with that if the US is going to step back. I understand that it's easy to despair. I speak to lots of people who really worry about the state of politics after Brexit, Donald Trump, and everything else that's gone on in recent years. But actually, now at this time when we're facing bigger challenges than ever before, now's the time to step forward and say we can be better, and let's be confident and create a better country. So let's say we can create a fairer and a stronger economy that can sustain public services. We're a rich country, we can afford to do that, and we believe we can. Let's stand up for an open Britain that welcomes people. Around Europe, the far right's been defeated in Austria, in France, in Holland, and we're going to defeat that hatred and that division here as well. And let's say that if the US isn't going to do it, that we'll lead the way on dealing with climate change, and we'll embrace the benefits that come with that. Green jobs, home insulation for people, ending fuel poverty, investing in the technologies of the future. And I'm happy to say the Green Party has all the policies to solve those solutions, but we need young people and we need people more than ever before to be brave and to vote for what you believe in, rather than vote for the same old politicians and the same old parties that have let you down so many times before. So I hope you consider voting for the Greens on June the 8th.
And the next for an open speech is John Hayward from the Conservative Party.
Hi, so my name is John Hayward. I've been called the compassionate and considerate Conservative. I'm not a typical career politician. I've got a background that spans science, international development in the charity sector, and education. So I originally trained as a scientist here at Cambridge. I stayed on, did a PhD in genetics. I then went overseas to some of the toughest countries in the world, the civil war zones of this world. Worked in the former Soviet Union, and I am passionate about social justice. And the same desire that took me overseas to help the neediest communities there is what I will bring to Cambridge in trying to help the neediest and disadvantaged in our communities here too. The work I was mostly involved in was adult education. So I've taught in universities across the former Soviet Union as well as America and the UK. Indeed, I helped to develop an Iraqi-led American university in northern Iraq. A few stories I could tell you about that one, but it won't fit in my 3 minutes. But that to say, I am passionate about education, and I am therefore proud to be standing on a manifesto which is committed to putting more money into further education, that is committed to introducing technical qualifications and making technical route as a real option, something that's not been for many decades in this country. For those who are more creatively or practically minded, not all of us can be academics, and not all of us would want to be. And that, I think, is particularly key here in Cambridge, where we've got the high-tech skills sector. We want to be encouraging all young people to fulfill their potential, whatever their skills and whatever their interests. The question of Brexit has been mentioned by a couple of others. I am the only one who is campaigning on a positive ticket for Brexit. I understand that 74% of us here in Cambridge did not vote to leave the EU last year. And that means it is all the more important, given that the government has invoked Article 50 and we will be leaving the EU in 2 years, that we have a strong voice in Parliament who is able to champion our concerns, the concerns of the university, the concerns of the hospital, the concerns of the high-tech industry, that we can still have flexible immigration, that we can attract the foreign students, the foreign academics, the foreign doctors and nurses on which our NHS depends, and indeed the high-skilled workforce that the businesses here in Cambridge and Cambridgeshire depend. We need a smart Brexit, a good and fair deal. I've got the experience of working with government ministers, and I will build on that experience and those relationships to ensure Cambridge's voice is heard. So I bring expertise in science, education, international development, charity sector, and a positive optimism for the future of Cambridge.
To make an opening speech is Keith Garrett from Rebooting Democracy.
Hi, you've heard 4 very eloquent speeches, so you can hear a speech from a computer scientist who doesn't get out much. So we've got big problems, global and societal. Inequality, climate change, which has been mentioned before. Politics, our current sets of politics, has just failed to address these. These long-term problems are ignored when the politicians are looking for media sound bites and what they think the media are going to want to hear. So it ends up as a popularity contest. So big in this is Brexit, where essentially it wasn't assessing what the best thing was for Britain. It was parties fighting against each other. How can we fix this? Some people say what we need is a benevolent dictator, but if we move away from that, because that eventually always goes wrong, it's not democracy's fault, it's the system of democracy we have, which is elections. So instead of the people ruling each other in a fair way, we end up with career politicians and this media-driven craziness. So the solution I'm proposing is something called sortition. So I read a book called Rebooting Democracy, which is where the name of the party came from. I did ask the author if I could use the name. So the idea is you have random selection of people. So you randomly select a group of people, and it's stratified. So you get 50% men, 50% women. So and you get a proportion of young, proportion of old. So it becomes a microcosm of the society as a whole. So while you may not be in that room, someone who is just like you is going to be in that room making decisions for you. So it's not new. They used it in ancient Athens, and it's where actually democracy started. So there's just democracy done a different way. So we would implement a multi-body sortition solution where people would have essentially jury service to go ahead, and they would go up and they would make the decisions for the country. They would set the agenda, and they would make policy changes according to what's the best. They would talk to experts, they would talk to lobby groups, and go forward and make good decisions. So it's been tried examples in various places in Iceland, and notably recently in Ireland, where they looked at things like abortion and same-sex marriage, which politicians can't make decisions about because they won't get re-elected again. Okay, there's more, but okay, thanks very much.
Okay, thank you very much for your opening speeches. We're going to move on to the hustings now. So again, our staff in the lovely shade of blue will have microphones. So if you have a question, do put your hand up and they'll come round so you can be heard. Please, again, ask one question at a time, so it's fair to everyone in the audience and it's fair to the candidates. So, does anyone have a question?
John, you say you're a compassionate Conservative. How do you defend this government's cuts and benefit reforms that have objectively damaged the lives of many, many disabled people?
Okay, I'm unique in this panel in that I am the only one who is disabled. I think I am the only one who's actually had a PIP assessment. I would defend them in that the goal, the objective of the benefit reforms was to target the help on those who needed it most. As I say, I've done a lot of work overseas working with the neediest and most disadvantaged communities. It's no good if you try and help everyone equally if the people who actually need the most help aren't getting sufficient help. And that's why the decision was taken to concentrate help on those with the greatest needs.
I need to. Are we taking like? Yeah, we can take the short one. Okay, yeah, so 30-second replies. That's all right.
Well, look, that's just not the case, John. The reason those changes were made was to save money. It was about cuts. And that was about a conscious political decision to blame or to make the poorest and most disabled people in society pay the cost of the economic crisis. And I cannot tell you the misery that I've seen in my surgery over the last 2 years. And I will not forgive you for that misery you've imposed upon people. And there will be a significant change to this system if Labour wins the election in 10 days' time.
Thank you for the question. I've worked in social care and I've seen the effects of austerity since 2010, both the coalition government and the Tory government, the effects that this has had on people with disabilities. People with disabilities have an added cost of living, they need extra support to be empowered to live independent lives and to be able to contribute to society, and it's been disgraceful what's happened in recent years. The UN has even called it a systemic violation of disabled people's rights. So that's not right. My party would end the sanctions regime, which has punitively affected disabled people specifically, end the private return to work assessments run by private companies like ATOS or Maximus, have those decisions made by healthcare professionals, and ensure that benefits and the support that for people with disabilities goes up in line with inflation, so that they've got the support they need to lead those independent lives.
Thank you.
I agree with all of what Stuart said. I think the recent reforms have been indefensible. The latest PIP changes we voted against. We tried to stop them in the House of Lords. Labour refused to vote with us and instead voted to regret them. I'd much rather they'd been stopped. I think we have to reform welfare to make it that it actually pays better. It should go up with inflation. I voted for that when I was in Parliament. Our manifesto, like the Green one, commits to doing that. The Labour one doesn't. The sanctions are cruel. We absolutely have to change it. The question is absolutely right.
Started with the coalition, Julian.
Actually, many of these started well before, as you know, Daniel. The 2007 welfare reform was atrocious.
Thank you. Would anyone else?
And so I think it's just a systemic problem. You've got different parties switching between things, and so currently you've got a party that is generally about business, etc., and that you need to make that change so it's actually the people who are represented, the people you want to represent are making those decisions, rather than you've now got one lot, and then we switch to another lot. You need to change the system so that we're making decisions that are good for all of us all the time, continually for the future.
Thank you very much. We move on to another question. The lady in the right.
John, you spoke very passionately about your brief for education. I applaud you for that and everything you've done. I've also spent my life in education. Excuse me. I was a secondary school teacher for 20 years. I worked here at the wonderful SU, managing the advice service. So I've worked in this country and abroad. And I find it very difficult to understand how the Tory party could be suggesting cutting school lunches for children who need them and replacing them with breakfast. I also find it extremely difficult from my own personal experience about the policy on grammar schools. I was actually a grammar school reject, and it took me a long time to actually get over the blow to my confidence as a child. I was able to get over that because I was very fortunate. In my generation, we had free university tuition. I could go to university as a mature student. Because of the situation with grants now, the demographic I understand for mature students in university has plummeted. So people like myself would never have been able to catch up on what we've lost because of the 11+ system. There is no evidence that grammar schools actually improve educational performance across the board. So I find it surprising that somebody with your commitment, and I can see that you do have that, and I take your word about your compassion, can actually be supporting policies that are striking at children who are desperately in need.
Thank you for the question and for the grace with which it was asked. You had two questions in there, so free school meals and the grammar schools. So on free school meals, this is an area that I've actually been looking at the research for some years, and groups like the Education Endowment Foundation have found that a free breakfast is actually as good, in some cases better, than a free lunch, partly because the kids don't have to wait until lunchtime before they get that pick-me-up, as it were, to boost their concentration. The policy has been slightly misrepresented. So anyone who is currently qualified for free school meals will continue to get a free school meal. The proposal is to give universal breakfast so that everyone starts the school day with some nutrition inside them and are able to concentrate in the lessons in the morning as well as in the afternoon. So people who are currently qualifying for free school meals will get 2 free meals a day. They will get breakfast and lunch. So that's based on the research that has been done by independent charities. On the question of grammar schools, I would defend, firstly, I wouldn't have called it grammar schools if I was the Prime Minister. I would have called it something else because they're not, because what they are introducing is not the same as the stigmatising system that existed before and that you described so eloquently, the negative consequences of on many children. The new system is opening up for teachers and parents another tool in the educational toolbox where they feel there is a gap. Again, the children who are on the free school meals are the ones who get twice as many good A star to C grade GCSEs when they go to a grammar school compared with not going to grammar school. It's about helping the most needy. And just as after 13 years of labour, we actually saw only 1% of pupils on free school meals winding up in a Russell Group university, and only 40 pupils on free school meals coming to Oxbridge, those figures are going up under the Conservatives because we are targeting help where it's needed, targeting help on the most disadvantaged in order to get them up the ladder, social mobility.
Does anyone want to?
We're all going to want to.
Yes, I mean, I think it's a great question. I agree very much with you, and I don't agree with John. We introduced free school lunches for all infants. It needs to expand to all of primary. The evidence is clear that it helps. Interestingly, it helps those who are already getting free school meals the most, perhaps due to destigmatisation, don't know exactly why, but it's a really, really good thing. We should continue it. I have no problem with breakfast, but if you really care about people, give them breakfast and lunch. What it actually is an effort to save money and provide 7p a day for breakfast, which is just pathetic. It's the wrong thing to do. Expand the lunches, give breakfast as well. On grammar schools, I agree, and whatever you call them, which is not the point, they are divisive, and the evidence is that they are not good educationally. The evidence is that they do not help people, other than the fact that you've chosen some people who are probably going to do quite well at the start because they were doing a bit better earlier on. They are completely the wrong thing to do. We should get rid of that, the obsession with brand new free schools in the wrong place. That's not how you should spend money. Spend money actually putting more money into schools, helping teachers, supporting teachers. That's the way you get better education.
Thank you. Daniel?
Well, I agree with pretty much everything Julian has just said, and also strongly commend the question, eloquently put. But Labour's going to go further than this. We're actually going to extend free school lunches, and we're going to pay for it very directly by ending the tax breaks on private schools, which I think is exactly the right thing to do. But there's one extra thing I'd say. This ideologically driven government, which started with the Go David Laws period, has actually stopped local authorities setting up schools in areas where they're needed. What a ridiculous situation, and we've had that here in Cambridge. That will end if Labour wins the election next week.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Thank you for the question. I think you've summed up better than anybody else could why grammar schools are wrong, so I don't need to go into any more details about that. I would also point out that the government's focus on opening up new academies and free schools in recent years, converting schools, sometimes against the will of local parents and teachers, to academies has been damaging and wrong, and there's no evidence that growing more academies and putting in more academies improves educational attainment either. Our party would like to make sure that parents and local communities have some accountability over their local schools. They're not held by multi-academy chain trusts. And so we would bring those academies and those free schools back under local authority control and fund them properly so that teachers can get on with teaching and children can enjoy their education. You also touched on tuition fees very quickly. Every other party on this platform has had a role in introducing and expanding tuition fees. We've been consistent in our disapproval of that ever since they were introduced. We would like to see tuition fees be abolished because just when I was here the other day chatting to the welfare officer, they were telling me that fees and finance is the biggest cause of mental health problems amongst young people and students at the university. And regardless of whether they have to pay them back immediately or they have to pay them back later, having £50,000 worth of debt hanging over your head for your education is not right.
That's
And-
timing.
Okay, well,
Sorry.
yeah, that's something to quite later. Yes.
Keith, did you want to?
Yes. So what needs to happen is that we need to stop flip-flopping between different ideological positions, as we've done. Should we have grammar schools? Should we get them? Should we have comprehensives or other schools? We need to sit down and figure out what the best people, sortition-based system, you get the best evidence together, you figure out what the way forward is. And I think the eloquency of the question shows that we are able as people to make decisions ourselves, and we don't really need the middlemen of someone promising something and then not delivering it. Why don't we just get together, figure out what the best way is forward and deliver that?
Thank you very much. Can we move on to another question?
Thank you. I'm Aziz from Cambridge University Students' Union. So Brexit negotiations will dominate the next 2, 3, 4, 5, however many years. And at stake are the future of EU students, EU researchers and long-standing research collaborations. If you win, what will you do specifically to fight for the interests of both universities, their reputation, their staff and their students, especially those staff and students from the EU and from Europe? And just to clarify, I'm asking for specifically what needs to be protected, so specific things that you will do and specific things that you will fight for.
So I'm going to go in reverse order from the speeches. So we'll start with Keith.
Okay. I think we have to be quite honest, I'm not going to win. But I was quite a passionate Remainer, so but I've essentially decided not to have a policy on anything specific because the idea is that I shouldn't be the person leading, it should be the people leading. So I would just have to say that under this system it would be up to the people to decide what is the best way forward. So I don't have a specific answer to say what I would do in this situation. Just to say that we need to actually figure out as ourselves how we're going to go forward.
Thank you. John?
we've already heard from other members of this panel disparaging remarks about the hard Brexit that Conservatives and the Prime Minister are pushing. Can I just do a quick survey, show of hands, who's read Theresa May's 12 negotiating objectives for Brexit?
Very quick read.
Who thinks Brexit is going to be important in the next few years? Okay, if you think it's important, why don't you go ahead and read after this debate the 12 negotiating objectives, because they are the platform on which people like me are standing. It is a soft, smart Brexit, and specifically for the university, defending flexibility so that we can have academic freedom, attract foreign students, continue partnering with universities in the EU as well as beyond the EU on research projects. And we are guaranteeing to maintain Britain, and I would say Cambridge, as the best place for science and innovation, and that includes record investment in research and development, and that maintaining some of the programs that have been through university-backed programs that have previously been supported through the EU.
Thank you. Stuart?
The absolute most important thing is to prioritise protecting the free movement of people, because free movement of students, academics, is fundamentally hugely important to higher education and to research. And unfortunately, the Labour Party, if they win this election, have said that free movement of people will end, regardless of what Daniel here thinks. That's what the Labour Party nationally have said. I would fight to protect during the Brexit negotiations that free movement of people, because I think it's benefited us economically as a society and culturally as well, and also in our public services, I would add, on top of what our universities would do. I also think we need to make sure that if we go ahead with Brexit, that we need to protect the Erasmus scheme as much as we can, or replace it with something similar, and protect Horizon 2020 funding, all the issues of specific funding, to make sure that that is replaced as we go ahead with Brexit. And the one most important thing that we could immediately do to send the best signal about our intentions for Brexit is by immediately declaring that the 3 million EU residents in the country are welcome to stay, because that sends a very good declaration about our intentions in this process.
Thank you very much. And Julian?
Great question, Matei, and congratulations on being Vice President of NUS soon. It's good to see you here. I agree with what Stuart said. It is about people and it's about money. We absolutely should guarantee EU citizens the right to stay. As I said earlier, they're our friends, our neighbours, our colleagues. We should protect EU funding in full, all the Horizon 2020, Euratom, all the rest of it, Erasmus. We should also make sure that free movement does continue, because it's not just about cash, it's about the ability to study elsewhere, to work elsewhere, to go to conferences elsewhere. If the visa system means that more conferences get cancelled because people from France cannot get a visa to come in, as already happens in the UK with Americans, Chinese and many others, that's a problem. Reinstating post-study work visas so it's easier for people to stay, continue to contribute. But actually it's even broader than that. It's about the message that we send out as a country. People are leaving the country now, friends of mine, because they feel they are not welcome here. If we don't get the message right, actually the policy detail won't matter, because people won't want to be here. And that would be disastrous for us.
Thank you very much. And Daniel?
As I said at the outset, guaranteeing the rights of EU citizens is absolutely essential. Labour's committed to staying in Horizon 2020. Labour's committed to staying within Erasmus. Labour will stay within the European Medicines Agency. Labour will keep us within Euratom. Doesn't sound like a very hard Brexit to me so far. It sounds to me like a whole range of very positive measures. I've also challenged the key people directly on making sure we stay within the European regulatory systems, which is absolutely key for our life sciences sector. And if you want to see what I've done personally, I was one of the first to raise the issues of the European Medicines Agency in debates in Parliament. So I'm absolutely determined we get as close as possible. I want to stay in the EU. Let's not beat about the bush. But if we can't do that, as close as is humanly possible.
Thank you very much. Another question? Person in the red at the back is Kieran.
Thank you. Having heard the entire panel talking about putting investment into Cambridge specifically into science and technology, which John just did, a lot of manifestos have been adequately costed, or some costed better than others. How would the panel get money to invest in Cambridge specifically, and where would that money come from?
Okay, I'm going to go in a complete random order and start with Stuart.
So I get the costing question first.
Sorry.
You're right, a lot of the manifestos have contained some uncosted promises, but I would point out that that seems to have been right across the board. Conservatives can say what they like about the Labour manifesto, but the 7p for free school meals, for example, shows that that's something that's happening right across the board. We've released green guarantees to talk about what our MPs in Parliament would fight for. So we haven't released a fully costed manifesto or system for government, because realistically the Greens aren't going to win this election, much as I would like us to. There are a number of really sensible, easy things we can do immediately to bring in a lot more funds to fund public services and fund investment. One of the most simple things is putting corporation tax back to where it was. Even the amount that has come down in the last couple of years costs us £5 billion a year. I'd like to see us look at some more innovative ways of taxing wealth and taxing financial transactions, for example, because we need to look at moving beyond ways of just taxing people's income, because the tax system is changing and it's becoming more difficult. Other European member states are exploring a financial transactions tax, which could bring in £20 billion a year to fund on things better, and a wealth tax could bring in around £25 billion, which is already done in other European member states. And let's cancel Trident and high-speed rail because they're not necessary, and use that £200 billion that those could use on things better spent.
Thank you. John?
Let's look at the Conservatives' record. That's what we want to continue more. We are currently one of the 2 strongest economically growing countries in the G7. That's been the case since before and has continued to be the case since the vote of last year. The apocalypse that many people said would happen after invoking Article 50 hasn't happened. Just look at what's gone on here in Cambridge. We've continued to attract massive foreign investment. So Apple, Amazon, expanding their premises near the station, new logistics centre up at Castle Park, the Japanese investment into Improbable to Cambridge graduate startup company, that kind of investment is what we've continued. Because we cut the corporation tax, something that Corbyn's party wants to reverse, we have actually increased the amount of money that is going into the exchequer. And that's why we've got money to be able to reduce the deficit. We're now back to the position we were in budget terms in 2010. We've reduced the deficit by 3/4 from its peak. And that's what we'll be able to continue doing by attracting the businesses, by promoting growth, and getting the tax to invest in the schools, the universities, the roads and the housing.
Thank you. Daniel?
Well, I certainly wouldn't believe anything as Conservatives say, because we were told the only thing that mattered was eliminating the deficit, and they've completely failed on their own targets. So don't listen to what they're saying. You can look at Labour's costed measures. There's debate about how accurate they are or not, but they certainly get us a long, long way towards the money we need. But finally, I'd say, actually, a non-party political point. We've got a highly centralised, treasury-driven system which doesn't allow cities like Cambridge to actually draw on the resources that should be available to us. So my first speech in Parliament was about trying to unlock, through a system of tax increment financing, the resources that are in this city, which would allow us to flourish. And that wouldn't just help Cambridge, that would help the wider economy too.
Keith?
So there's actually some quite good ideas here, and it seems like people either say one or the other. You need to sit down, work out what is the best evidence-based of going forward, and so say, okay, how are we going to get more tax? How are we going to get more money for Cambridge, etc. So rather than just, again, flip-flopping between a party ideology, we work out just the best way forward, and we do that. Thank you.
Thank you. And finally, Julia.
Look, it's a great question, and it's right to ask, because otherwise you'll get parties that will promise you everything and a pony, because they just don't care. The Institute for Fiscal Studies, which is a very well-respected, non-partisan body, had a look at the manifestos, and they said that both the Labour and the Conservative manifestos were not honest, because they hid things that were going to happen. They described ours as the best costed of the 3. I'm not saying they said ours was perfectly costed, but it was the best costed, something I'm quite keen on. They also, by the way, said it was the most progressive, that it helped the poorest 50% more in terms of tax and benefit changes than any of the other major parties. And that's because we've put in things which are clear, like we will fund the NHS money and social care from a penny on income tax. It means you pay more if you're earning enough, but you know what it will be. We'd also put corporation tax up a bit. We'd move capital gains tax back up to the level we had it during the coalition, higher than it is now, higher than it was under Labour. I'd love to get rid of Trident. Every single Lib Dem MP voted to get rid of Trident. But the key thing is investment in research, the sort of investment you were talking about, pays money back. It's the right thing to put money in because it gives you more money in all the future years. So you absolutely should do it.
Thank you. Perfect. Was that everyone? That was everyone. Do we have another question? Yes.
I've got a question about the honesty in the manifesto. During her interview with Andrew Neil, Theresa May indicated Tory investment into the NHS will be based on the Naylor report, which advocates the sale of NHS land to private developers on a 2-for-1 giveaway with sales incentives by the withholding of government funds to NHS suppliers who do not wish to comply. Can John explain how the Tories can justify the withholding of funds to NHS trusts who do not want to sell their assets? And can the panel explain why the electorate should not view this as anything other than a blatant asset stripping exercise?
I don't know the specific asset detail that you're referring to. What I would say is that Conservatives have put an extra 10 billion into the NHS. We are particularly focusing on mental health. So we have put 11.5 billion into mental health, and as a parent of 2, I'm really proud that we are committing to put a qualified mental health first aider into every school, as well as encouraging workplaces to get a qualified mental health first aider in the same way that everywhere already has a physical health first aider. Going forwards, we have committed in the manifesto, through the growth that we're expecting from the economy, we're putting 8 billion extra over and above real terms increase into the NHS, and embarking on one of the most ambitious capital investment projects the NHS has ever seen.
I come back on that claim about real terms investment, because this is about the capital funds into the NHS, and the capital funds is about the maintenance of the property and facilities. And this money in the Naylor report is the money that should be upholding our buildings and our facilities for the NHS, not the staffing. And this money, this so-called £10 billion going in, is specifically by Theresa May to Andrew Neil on television. She has said that money comes from the Naylor report, and that Naylor report says very specifically from the sale of assets in the NHS. So this is not new money, this is the sale of assets to fund the capital revenue,
Okay, as I
supposedly
say,
going from.
I've not read the Naylor report, but what I can say
John, I'm
is
going
that
to give
in
you
the
30 seconds to respond to that, and then we're
10
gonna
seconds
move
would be
on.
enough.
10 seconds.
What's in the manifesto is we are going to embark on the most ambitious capital investment project into the NHS has ever seen. And that is under a Conservative government. But it will only happen if we have economic growth. And that will all be put at risk by the higher debt and the higher taxes of a Corbyn-led administration.
Okay, I'm going to move on to let the rest of the panel answer.
It's totally right in the Labour report.
Stuart, want to start?
Yes.
How much public money goes into the sale to sell to private companies. You haven't answered the question. The lady is absolutely right.
And the incentive is also the 2-for-1. They're incentivising to sell off cheaply, which means that developers will get a nice handout. It'll be interesting to see who sits on the boards of those companies.
Okay, I'm going to
If
move
I
on.
can come back
Yeah,
in.
go ahead.
To start with, the asset stripping and privatisation of the NHS has been going on for years. The private finance initiative is one way in which public money is taken and used to subsidise private interests, and that's been bankrupting NHS trusts around the company. It started under Labour, it continued under the coalition, and it's continued now. We cannot trust the Tories with the NHS. I mean, they can talk all they like about big figures, but the fact is the Royal College of Nurses are planning to go on strike, midwives have gone on strike, and so have junior doctors. The staff are telling you the NHS is in a real crisis now, and it won't survive another 5 years of the same. We need to immediately reverse the privatisation of the NHS. We are the only party that have committed to the NHS reinstatement bill backed by the British Medical Association, which would bring those contracts that have gone out to private companies back under public control and make sure that they're funded properly. Because under the coalition, and Julian can't hide from this even though he may not have voted for it, privatisation increased massively. The amounts of the billions of pounds start going towards private interests rather than towards the NHS. We need to reverse that privatisation and make sure that funding is in properly, because investing in capital infrastructure, as we talked about earlier, is a good investment and will return our money many times over.
Thank you very much. Who wants to go next?
I'm quite happy to.
Anna?
You're absolutely right to highlight, and I agree very much with what Stuart said. When I worked at Unison, we spent a lot of time trying to track down the privatisation trail, if you like, and certainly one of the things I'm proud of having done in Parliament was look into the extraordinary waste of money locally on the Uniting Care partnership. And it turned out it all actually went back to a privatisation group within the Department of Health, a special projects group, which we've got shut down, I'm glad to say, but I'm sure will prop up somewhere else under a Conservative administration. This is basically the big choice that faces us. Do we fund our public services properly through taxation, or do we basically hand it over to people who are trying to make a private profit out of it? And that seems to me to be completely wrong.
Thank you.
I mean, I think this is a really good question. I agree with what Stuart said. I've been working in the NHS part-time for the last 2 years. And I've seen many of these real problems. And PFI has been a huge problem for many, many years, as Stuart said. Labour did a huge amount of it. The group that Daniel referred to was set up by Labour to push privatisation. Under Labour, it went from £1.1 billion a year of private within the NHS to £7.5 billion a year. That's wrong. It's something I've campaigned against, and I'd like to see that absolutely changed. PFI, which I voted against, as you know, Daniel. PFI has been hugely damaging. Again, under Labour, Peterborough and Stamford Hospital will cost £2 billion to pay back. That's exactly the problem you're talking about. We have to reverse that. We have to get the money in as well, which I talked about already. But it's also about morale. If we annoy student nurses by taking bursaries away, if we annoy junior doctors, if we annoy all the staff within the NHS, we are never going to be able to deliver the sort of thing that we'd like to see. The NHS reinstatement bill, I voted for its predecessor. I would happily vote for it in Parliament.
Thank you very much. Okay.
So it seems like things are happening when you don't listen to the people who actually work there, who need to make those changes locally. So there was a quote from a book I read, which was give people responsibility and they act. Sorry, give people responsibility and they act responsibly. So you allow them to make the changes rather than dictating everything from a central government point of view. And just the point behind sortition, you start to give people the actual power to do things.
Thank you very much. Do we have any other questions? We'll go up the back to the person in the black shirt.
As someone who's kind of lost faith and belief in national UK politics as a whole, and who sees political parties as self-interested and fueling divisive dialogue instead of encouraging open discussion, if you were elected to Parliament, what steps would you take to work with colleagues on both sides of the bench to help the public see each other as complexly as they see themselves?
The last sentence.
What would you do to help the public in general help each other see each other as complexly as we see ourselves, to see each other as equally as we hold our own views?
I'm going to start with Julian.
Look, I mean, I think it's a really interesting question, and I think you're right that the tribalisation of politics has been hugely problematic. I dislike the way, if you watch Prime Minister's questions, you see grown adults behaving like school children, and I think it's atrocious. The truth is, when you turn the cameras off, people from different parties do get on quite well. I have a lot of friends across the parties. I probably have a UKIP friend, but I can't think of one at the moment. But among the others, and we are still very, very much in touch. I'm not going to name the MPs from other parties who wish me good luck, because it would get them in trouble, but it spans quite a broad spectrum. And you can do these things. So I chaired a couple of all-party parliamentary groups on refugees, making a big difference there, on cycling, on a select committee which was cross-party. And actually, those relationships work well. I worked with Caroline Lucas, for example, to lead the fight against fracking. We can do that. I'm also director of an organisation which funds plural politics. So we funded More United, some of the Progressive Alliance work. It's something I'm really passionate about, and I hope we can detribalise politics. And I think that will give people a bit more comfort. You're seeing mature discussion rather than petty point scoring.
I'm going to go with Daniel.
I very much hope that we can do politics better in this country in future. I spent a lot of my time in the Labour Party developing a different form of policy making, away from the old confrontational approach to a discursive one where one concentrates on trying to find the things one has in common rather than disagrees on. And just as Julian has described, I work cross-party in Parliament. Quite frankly, if you're a Labour politician in the east of England and you don't work with other parties, you're not going to get very far. And certainly one of the things I try and do locally, I work very closely with Heidi Allen, find it a little harder with Lucy Fraser, and I find it almost impossible with Stephen Bartlett. But I can work with other people from other parties. And just finally, I would say that I think it's actually quite hard to have this discussion when you've got parties like the Liberal Democrats who put out literature in blue, trying to masquerade as something other than that they are.
David, have
And
you seen
that-
the literature in yellow?
And that destroys trust in politics. And until people face up to that, I think we're not going to make any further progress.
Thank you very much. Keith?
I haven't sent out any literature, so okay. So, if I got elected, essentially you're sitting around with a group of career politicians, and they are abstracted. Sorry, they are abstracted from all of us. There is just a different level. We're slightly different here, where you get people like Julian and Daniel, who are basically a lot closer to us. But my party would move forward things where you get citizens' engagement. So we're actually going forward something called the G1000, where you get citizens' engagement in Cambridge, where citizens are directly involved. Then we'd move forward to having a House of Lords that was totally randomly selected. So you would have the second body of the country would be citizens, and they would be reviewing Parliament. And then eventually onto a multi-body sortition system, where we would be running the country. We wouldn't have party ideology, and we'd remove all this nonsense, and that's what we do.
Thank you very much. Stuart?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think it's a really interesting point to raise. In my job, working in the NHS, there's a duty on me to respect all the people I care for and all the people that I work for, all the people that I work with as well. And I'd like to see politicians exercise the same respect for other people, because it's not right that they shout at each other and insult each other and undermine each other. We should be grown up and respectful about the way we do politics. And everything that's happened in recent years, with Joe Cox, with the violence and the rhetoric around politics, puts a duty on all politicians and us, everyone here who's on this panel, to make sure that we speak respectfully and we don't inflame situations, we don't make things worse, we are respectful towards other people. I'm glad that in this election the Green Party have worked together with other parties to form alliances to try and make sure that we can work together where we've got more in common and beat those politicians who maybe incite, or beat those politicians who we disagree with more, for example in Richmond Park against Zach Goldsmith in London. And finally, the most important point I would make is that if we really want to trust people and respect them, the biggest thing that we need is electoral reform to make sure that everybody's vote in this country counts, and not just those who are living in marginal seats. For far too long, decisions are made on the basis of marginal constituencies. PR would give people a better say and include them more in their politics.
Thank you. And lastly, John.
It's precisely because of the issues you raise, the tribalism, the partisan nature of debate in Parliament, that I'm sitting here today. Flying back to the UK from just north of Afghanistan on 9/11, on the day of the attacks in 2001, made me realise Parliament needs people who are able to work a bit less tribally, people who are able to bring a bit more experience than the typical union hacks and lawyers and bankers to Parliament. And I am proud of the fact that for the past 10 years, largely through a career in charities, social reform sector, I've worked with politicians from across all parties. I'm proud, and I've said before, that Daniel and I always exchange pleasantries when we see each other on parliamentary estate. I would conclude by saying, if you want blue, you definitely vote for the true blue, and all my literature is definitely blue. I am known as someone who can work cross-party and who is a team player, unlike some others at this panel.
Thank you very much. Do we have any other questions?
Hello. So my question is to the panel. As someone who graduated a couple of years ago with about 50k of debt and now lives in private accommodation, paying a lot of money for the private rental sector, to live above living landlords, which is obviously not ideal. I'd like to know what your party would do if you were elected to make it easier for young people like myself to settle in Cambridge, rather than having to sort of sink our wages into private rented accommodation for a few years and then ultimately have to move because we can never really settle down here.
Thank you. Does anyone want to go first? Sure.
Two elements. Firstly, Labour will lower the interest rates to repay this debt and will raise the earnings threshold. So that doesn't write it off completely. I know Stuart's party would write it off completely, but it's a big bill, I have to say, and I'm not quite sure where it will be found. But we want to make it easier to undo the mistakes that have been made in the past in terms of student debt. The housing question is a much, much bigger one. I think part of the problem at the moment is that the private rented sector, 6-month tenancies, lead to an endless spiral of rising rent rises. And what we will do is we'll introduce 3-year tenancies and also deal with some of the abuses that letting agencies constantly perpetrate. But ultimately, it's going to require a substantial change in our housing system. 500 new council homes for Cambridge will help some people, possibly won't necessarily help you. I think go back to key worker housing as well. It's a complicated mix, but for me, actually, the failure of our housing system is actually at the heart of the problem that the British economy has suffered over the last 50, 60 years, and it's going to require really big, substantial change to solve that.
Thank you very much. Sean?
Yeah, thank you for the question as well. I live in private rented accommodation. I work for the NHS. I couldn't afford to buy a house in Cambridge, and I probably never will unless things change. To start with, on the tuition fees and student debt question, we would like to abolish student debt. The question of how we afford to do that, most of that debt is going to be unpayable back anyway, and it's going to have to be written off in the longer term. So let's end it now, save the years and years of worrying about debt and paying interest. It's a huge financial black hole for the government. We can end it now and save you that problem. We need to rebalance the housing market to make sure that house prices aren't constantly going up, because they've gone up by more than the average wage every year for the last 6 or 7 in Cambridge, which is ridiculous. We would like to look at introducing rent controls in areas of high rent pressure, such as Cambridge, longer, more secure tenancies so you don't have to move out every 6 months to a year, and make sure that there's mandatory licensing for landlords so you don't have to deal with the kind of exploitative landlords that I have in the past as well. And we do need to build more affordable homes. Basically, we don't build enough public, affordable homes anymore. And by affordable, that doesn't mean 80% of the market rent in Cambridge.
Thank you very much. Any preferences? Sure, Julie?
Look, I mean, it's a great question. On tuition fees, I said I wish they'd never been introduced. I led several of the protests when Labour introduced them. It's awful that they're there. On housing, I actually agree with a lot of what Daniel said. It was also stuff that was in a bill that I tabled, a private members bill, which I mentioned earlier, which didn't make progress. But we do have to do that. The longer, more secure tenancies, better protection from rogue landlords, getting ahead of these letting agencies. You know, it's disgraceful they'll charge hundreds of pounds for you to just change a name on a form. I think there's a lot more that we can do. There are schemes that we're pushing, like rent to buy, so that rent would get saved up. Ultimately, we do need more housing, council housing, social housing. We'd like to see a living rent. We'll be talking to housing associations about that, where you pay a fraction of your income on the rent. So it's set by what you can afford, not by some arbitrary figure. The long-term vision has to be getting more houses in Cambridge and across the country. Part of that would be having east-west rail, new station at Addenbrooke's, like the one I was involved in getting up in Cambridge North. Have that, put a town along there, 20,000 homes, 15 minutes from Addenbrooke's by train, 20 minutes from the city centre, 25 minutes from the science park. That would start to take the heat out of the housing market.
Thank you very much. John?
So Keith mentioned earlier the long-term challenges, and I've been really privileged the past year to be working alongside the chairman of the Prime Minister's Policy Board on some of the long-term challenges, the challenges facing the country that can't just be turned around in 4 or 5 year parliamentary term. Cost of living, adult social care, the mistake wasn't mine, but also on housing. And I was really pleased to be able to see in the housing white paper earlier this year some of the measures that are being taken to free up more space, to free up modular housing, so more housing can be built more quickly. As others have said, it's a long-term issue. There's been insufficient supply, but I am also proud of the Conservative schemes that have enabled tens of thousands of people to get on the housing ladder for instance, through the Help to Buy schemes. Because I'm amazed that some of my friends who are renting are paying more than those of us who are paying a mortgage. So we've got to help people be able to get onto the housing ladder if they so desire.
Thank you very much. And Keith?
I'm obviously not going to suggest anything's going to help you right now, but we've got good ideas, again. So in the multi-body sortition that we're proposing, these ideas would come forward, and then it might be you, or it'll be people like you, who would be actually listening to the experts, listening to lobby groups, making the decisions to actually change our legislation. So it wouldn't be people who, some of those people in your group might own houses, some rent, some might be homeless. So you've got, again, a microcosm of the country, and they would be making the changes. So it would just end up as a fairer society because they're making changes that reflect everyone's views and experiences. Thanks.
Thank you very much. As we are we're at 1:45 now, but we agreed at the beginning that we're going to have a minute each for a closing statement, so we have a bit more time. But I'm going to ask that you have 30 seconds now each to ask the questions so we can get through as many as possible. So does anyone have any other questions? Yes?
It's not a difficult spot. Good evening to the panel. I'm going to be graduating from marketing this month, so in the next few months. And such, I mean, Labour wants to introduce a potential wage cap on such wages. And I want to know, for each party, how would you help young people, such as myself, going into the job market, aspire to the most successful they can be, whereas if Labour wants to restrict that, what can other parties do in order to help people aspire to be as successful as they possibly can?
And we'll start with John.
So I'm really proud to be standing on a manifesto that lays out near the start 5 key principles, one of which is equality of opportunity. You'll have gathered by now, equality of opportunity is something I've promoted in disadvantaged communities around the world, but equality of opportunity does mean at the top end as well as the bottom end. And so I am pleased that it is actually under a Conservative government that we have closed the gender income gap. It's still a bit too high, just under 10%, but it's lower than it's ever been before. We're the ones who have reduced income inequality to the lowest level since 1986. We're the ones who are actually delivering the social justice whereby people who have the bigger pockets make the biggest contribution.
That's time,
So,
John, thank you.
Yeah.
Keith?
Again, it's not. You might have heard this before. Again, it's not really up to me. It's going to. So again, people like you would be represented, and so, but people from all spectrums would be represented, and so I'm kind of hoping we might move away from the fact that that how we rate as value is rated just in income. We should also look at happiness, etc. And that's hopefully things that will come out when we stop having parties that are obsessed with this kind of income thing and looking at GDP, and people actually bring in policies that make their lives better. So hopefully it will help that way.
Thank you very much. Stuart?
Thank you for the question. My party would like unpaid internships to be something that we look at ending soon, because equality of opportunity is important, and it's the best jobs shouldn't just be available to those that can afford to go out and get that experience. If you're going to be doing work for a company for a length of time, you should be entitled to a decent level of pay for that to make sure you've got that opportunity. And all I would say to you is, well, we are also committed to a £10 minimum wage by 2020 to make sure that all work pays well enough. And good luck to you if you end up making a lot of money. Then I'm also quite hopeful that you will pay a significant amount of tax, because, you know, if you want the NHS and you want social care and you want good schools, then that's something that we need to accept in our society.
Thank you very much.
Yes, so the immediate answer is, as Stuart says, an end to unpaid internships. I've campaigned for that for many years. Controls on zero-hour contracts, which we brought in. There's still further to go. But I really do want to take issue with this idea that being the most successful means earning as much as possible. I hope that's not what you actually meant. We need to value all sorts of other things. To me, the test of whether an economy is doing well, whether individuals are doing well, is well-being. How happy are you with your life? And that means all sorts of things for different people. Money matters a lot. When you don't have that much of it, it's really, really important. And we have to provide more support for people there. But beyond that, all the evidence is, do you like what you're doing? Do you live in an environment where you feel safe? Do you have friends? Do you have hobbies? Do you feel engaged with society? I've campaigned for many years to try to have wellbeing impact assessments on policies, so we focus on what really counts.
Thank you very much. And lastly, Daniel.
I think you're probably referring to the idea of the pay differentials that Labour wants to clamp down on. And I hope you do really, really well. But frankly, you're not going to have to worry till you're earning probably £200,000, £300,000. And for most people, that's not going to be the most pressing problem that they're facing. But the advantage you'd have in future, and I'm sorry it's not for your generation, is that you wouldn't be going into it laden with student debt. I think that's a better balance for the future.
Yeah, sure.
Question for the whole panel. How would you end homelessness in the UK at the moment?
It's getting hard. Start with John.
So again, I am proud of the Conservative record that we've been able to relieve homelessness or get people out of homelessness for 1 million people over the last 7 years. We've set up some funds to address issues of rough sleeping. So there's a fund to prevent people rough sleeping the first time, another fund to deal with people who are long-term rough sleepers because they are the ones who often have other issues, need help with mental health issues. And so we're working with other groups, social workers and the like in the community to help these groups. We've committed in our manifesto to halve homelessness from its current rate by the end of the 5-year term and ultimately to see it reduced to 0. And that is the social justice platform of Theresa May that she set out when she was on the steps of Downing Street that I'm proud to stand on.
Thank you very much. Keith?
So the government that would go forward with the sortition body would have homeless people as part of its makeup. So they would help make the changes, and hopefully you would end up with a more compassionate set of people. When you get a group of people together, they generally end up as more progressive, and hopefully we'll get to a world where essentially food and shelter are just a right, which they should be.
Thank you very much. Stuart?
I wouldn't be proud of the rise in homelessness in Cambridge in recent years. I think it's a disgrace. My party would, to be very concise, we would end the sanctions regime because too many people are forced into homelessness because they've missed an appointment at the job centre. If you've paid your tax your whole life and you're entitled to that security if and when you need it. We need to restore proper local authority funding so that we can run decent mental health services and support for people that are at risk of becoming homeless. And in the longer term, we need to look at solving the housing crisis so that in places like Cambridge, there are affordable options for people.
Thank you very much. Daniel?
Agree very much with what Stuart's just said. In fact, by 2010, it hadn't been completely resolved, but we were a long way towards it, and it's gone backwards so tragically since then. And I think people in Cambridge now are very, very unhappy, not just the people who are sleeping rough on our streets, but actually the rest of us who feel ashamed in a rich society that we're in that situation. Also, the government's making it worse. I was at Willow Lane the other day talking to people. The changes to the supported housing system have put many of our services at risk. They put it on hold for a year, but I tell you, we have 5 more years of Theresa May. This situation will get worse, not better.
Thank you very much. Julian?
It's a really good question, one I've been passionate about for a long time. I've worked with a lot of the charities doing everything from foot care at Winter Comfort when I was with St John Ambulance to helping in various others and more recently. Part of it is about the supply of homes that are affordable. That's the easy thing to say, but actually making that a reality. Then it's about support beforehand. We've seen a combination of insecure tenancies, the sanctions regime, Stuart, right to say we should get rid of that, and local housing allowance means that people often lose tenancies and can't find anything else. There's nothing available inside Cambridge, and the mental health support as well for many people who are homeless. But it's also about afterwards. I have a number of friends who are ex-homeless, and when I talk to them, they say the support after they've been rehoused is often very weak. So you get people who've got out of homelessness and then fall back into it. There's more support needed to fix that.
Time, Julian.
We can end rough sleeping and treat homeless people as humans.
That's everyone, right?
Yeah.
Perfect. We are 5-2, so I think we're going to have to stop there. Sorry? Yeah, so with a minute each for a closing statement. So if we go in reverse order from the opening, so Keith, would you like to start?
Okay, so hopefully I've just told you my idea of sortition, well not my idea, the ancient idea of sortition. It's happening all over the world. There's a fair way of going forward. Companies are using it, governments are using it. We're going to start servicing something called the G1000 in the continent, and we're just bringing that here. So it's like a gathering of 1,000 people to talk about their community. So I think a fairer time is coming when we'll look back and go, that was crazy how we used to do democracy. We do it in a much better way now. So hopefully this is the start. So thank you.
John?
I'm proud of the Conservative track record in eliminating 3/4 of the deficit that we inherited in 2010, in taking 4 million people out of tax altogether, 61,000 people alone here in Cambridge who have been able to benefit from the £1,000 tax cut. the 18 new schools here in Cambridge that are good or outstanding, delivering an excellent education for young people. That is a record that I want to build on. I want to bring in my experience from overseas, my experience in adult education, and be a non-career politician, an alternative to the two ex-MPs. I want to be a strong voice for Cambridge, not fighting Brexit, but working with the government to deliver a good and a fair deal for Cambridge, for the country, for Europe, and for the world. And my friends in former Soviet Union are baffled as to why anyone in this country would even be contemplating a communist Marxist-backed manifesto of Corbyn with his record of 35 years sympathy for terrorists.
John, thank you. And then we have Stuart.
Thank you everyone for coming tonight. Hopefully now you know a little bit more about me. You know that I care about people. I'm a nurse. I've come into politics for the right reasons, but I'm also capable enough to deliver on what we're promising to you. And more than anyone else, I understand the desire to get rid of this cruel and callous government that we've got right now. I understand that. I work in the NHS. I know why we need rid of the Tories, which is why the Green Party have been working together with other parties in the rest of the country to help us achieve that. But in Cambridge, they're not going to win. You have the luxury and the freedom to vote for what you believe in. And if you don't agree with the Labour Party's national position on Brexit, or you can't stomach the Lib Dems and what they did in government, then the Greens are a real option for you. There are huge issues to be decided in the next 5 years. What we do with Brexit, what kind of country we are, whether we fund and whether we save the NHS and social care. And what nobody else has mentioned, climate change. We have to deal with climate change in the next Parliament, or we blow our chances of keeping it to a manageable level. And none of the other parties are serious about addressing that issue. I am, and you should vote for me in June.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much for coming. We've discussed a lot of interesting things. Stuart is right to say that here in Cambridge there's no chance of the Conservatives winning. You can vote safely for what you believe in. And you have to choose who you want as your local MP, and I would suggest you should go for somebody who actually has a track record of delivering things, actually making things happen, not just talking about them. So, for example, I was very proud to play a key role in introducing same-sex marriage, something I'm still extremely proud of, that we never touch on. There's still more to go. When I chaired the All-Party Group on Refugees, I made a difference. When we led the fight against fracking, I got legislative change. I co-sponsored the legislation to make sure that we spend 0.7% of our GNI on international development aid, helping the poorest people around the world. I even, as a Lib Dem, managed to get the support from the National Union of Students. Now that's quite an achievement. So you have a choice. I would urge you to vote for somebody who will deliver for schools, for hospitals, who's actually made the difference. And if you oppose Brexit and you want to send that message, vote for an anti-Brexit party and don't vote Labour or Conservatives, which will be interpreted as support for the Brexit trajectory we are currently on. Thank you for coming.
Thank you. And lastly, Daniel.
Thank you very much for what's been a really interesting and stimulating debate tonight. Julian talks about delivery. Actually, I'm not sure what 7 or 8 Liberal Democrat MPs in Parliament are going to be able to deliver.
So
that I think is the key. And what I'm hoping is that Labour wins the election. But if Labour doesn't win the election, then it's going to be about who is going to be able to deliver for Cambridge in opposition. And I've already been doing that over the 2 years that I've been your representative. In the end, I don't think this is about me. I think this is about you, and I think it's about Cambridge. And I think the key thing is, what kind of society do we want to live in? Do we want to carry on as we are, or are we going to actually tackle this gross inequality that we have in this country, with the super rich getting further and further away and everyone else getting left behind? That's what Jeremy Corbyn is offering, and I think it's a huge, huge opportunity for all of us.
To all of the candidates on the panel, and thank you to the audience who asked questions and who just came today. It's really hot in here, I can imagine in the room. We have a drinks reception outside, so if you go back out and up the ramp to the left, we have a bar. So feel free to help yourself. There's also, I think, still tea and coffee outside if you prefer a hot beverage. Yes, and cupcakes. So help yourself, and thank you again for coming. Thank you very much.